Nice. Well, so nice to
Okay.
meet you in person, or in person on
Thank you.
Zoom.
Yeah.
Finally. So I don't have alcohol. I only have tea, even though it says coffee on here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great
Um,
to meet you in cyberspace. This is so
right.
much fun. I love podcasting. Yeah. And this is my first one this year. I haven't been able to get on any podcast this year. So thank you so much for reaching out.
Oh my God, no worries at all. No, it's my pleasure. Thank you for taking the offer. So I've been following you for a while on Twitter, and your posts are fascinating. They're very varied, lots of different topics. And I think the one that really kind of triggered me to reach out to you was the one that you posted about Satoshi Nakamoto possibly being an NSA project, or Bitcoin being an NSA project. And there was a whole thread of discussion about that. So I thought that would be a really interesting thing to chat about. But obviously, we should kick off with you introducing who you are. So if you'd like to tell everyone who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm Decrim Nat on Twitter. I've been in the Bitcoin space for a couple of years now. I've been active in the space more like a year. But I've been in Bitcoin since 2015. It was just a side thing for me. It started out as a travel fund. I had been traveling a lot when I was still working in the fiat world, and I met a guy actually from the UK who told me about Bitcoin, and so I was like, oh, that's pretty neat. I was just very naive about it, thinking it's just a bank on the internet that I can withdraw local cash from wherever I am. I'm originally from Japan. I grew up on a military base, a U.S. military base in Japan. So
All right.
from childhood, I'm used to having to convert U.S. currency to Japanese yen, just from a childhood. So I think being in that bicultural sort of setting, with, bi currency that growing up, I've worked both on base, for US dollar and worked off base on the little 7-Eleven right off the gate, when I was a teenager. So, yeah, and you're from the UK too, and meeting, my friend from Britain who was going through, like, we went through our political journeys together, and they were, going through Brexit, and I learned more about the European economic situation. One of my first Bitcoin teacher, I think for most of us online, was Anthony Antonopoulos. And so I learned about the Greek financial crisis and what that was about. And I mean, the whole Bitcoin journey has really been this consciousness, learning about the global economy, and that's kind of just been a whole journey. And then, yeah, I think in 2020 when the COVID hit, and the Bitcoin started to skyrocket into, and everybody was, it was just chaotic. So that's when I started to learn. I started reading more about the Bitcoin books, like Bitcoin Standard, and some of the layered money, and some of the books to understand the whole system. So that's when I really became a maxi, and I had been studying psychedelics up until then, and then in 2018, I came across Brandon Quittem's, uh, "Bitcoin is the Mycelium of Money" article that he wrote. So that was when I was like, oh, there's people that are kind of connecting the dots between sort of the psychedelic, the way that you see the world through a psychedelic lens, and Bitcoin. So I was like, oh, that's, I got to find these people. So I have been doing my activism in Decriminalized Nature. It's a decentralized organization. I was a activist with and it's just an independent activist online. Just talking about the benefits of specifically psilocybin. That's just the medicine that I am familiar with. So that's my activism on Twitter started with Decriminalized Nature, and then as the financial crisis started to hit in 2020, I moved my tweet eye to more of the Bitcoin Twitter side, because I wanted to really understand what the space was about. So I just observed for about a year while I was, trying to understand doing my homework of learning about Bitcoin. And then last year, I think I would consider myself class of 21, when I became more active in the Bitcoin Twitter space and starting to make connections. And about a year ago, I got on the first on my first podcast, which was the hash rate podcast. So yeah, I've been sort of chronicling my journey through these podcast mechanisms. So thank you so much, Christy, for
Yeah.
reaching out.
No, no
Yeah.
worries at all. So just to backtrack a bit then, so you grew up on a military base in Japan, so you're half Japanese and
Hmm.
half American. Um,
Yes.
and then how old were you when you moved back to the US?
I was my father was stationed in Central California for 4 years. So for about when I was about 10 to 14, I was on a military base, and those were like the Top Gun years, so it's when you go through psychedelic journeys and you go through trauma, you kind of look back about your life, and it's just like what the background was going on, politically and so on. So yeah, I mean, we were stationed in a US Air Force base in California. And a lot of the the Hollywood sort of propaganda for the military industrial complex was, ongoing. Like, America is really good at exporting its culture.
Ah, I
And
see. Right, that's what you mean by the Top
yeah,
Gun years, right?
yeah, right, right. So yeah, and it's interesting now, I think, going back to the tweet that is I think there's two debates that I think we could talk about. Is one is the origin, right? Is Satoshi an NSA project or intelligence community project, or some kind of like, the higher math sort of, circles, right? That sort of the computer science theories kind of stem from. And then there's another debate, I think, which is the narrative that's shifting right now is, will the state adopt Bitcoin? And I think that in the 2024 presidential candidates, there's four candidates now that are promoting Bitcoin. So I think this is the first mass introduction of Bitcoin. I think that the narrative is now being set. I just saw that, like, RFK is just dropped a on Joe Rogan podcast. So there's definitely, I think, a narrative that's being written about Bitcoin sort of starting to become a mass adoption technology.
Yeah,
So I think this is the first introduction to the mass people about Bitcoin. So yeah, I
yeah.
think there's two debates. There's the origin story, and then the where we are out in time today. And like, I mean, what do you think about I mean, your thoughts on that, whether it's
I'm
a state
curious.
or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious actually, just before we get to that, just to understand a little bit about your background into psilocybin and decrim nature or decrim nap. Um,
Hmm.
because I feel like, to your point about Brandon Quittam's article, which I haven't read, by the way, I'll go back and read it. But it
Hmm.
feels to me like it might be helpful to sort of talk about how some of those threads tie together. So one of my observations about Bitcoin, and I think we talked about this before, was just that the journey of getting into Bitcoin is a very strange one for many of us, because the act of studying it and getting to understand it changes you. So it changes the world, the way that you look at the world. It starts to kind of open your eyes, I guess, to what many of us call the matrix, obviously taken from the Keanu Reeves film. And that very
Hmm.
phrase that gets used very often in Bitcoin, like orange pilling, which obviously refers to like the red pill in the Matrix movie, and how, if you take the red pill, nothing goes back to being the same. So it's almost the same when you study Bitcoin. It does something to you, which I find very strange as a concept, because it's just a piece of code. And the fact that that piece of code can actually have such a monumental impact on somebody's life, I guess in a similar way to the way that writing does. Writing's just some inscriptions, it's just code really, but it can have a monumental impact on somebody's life. And I find that aspect really interesting, because I think that ties into a lot of different things. But I wanted to understand, so your Bitcoin journey, you said it started in 2015, but did you already have an interest in psychedelics before that? And if so, like how did that journey happen and why?
Yes, yeah. Great questions. Yeah, I was into psychedelics. My introduction to psychedelics was at Burning Man, and I come from the Burning Man school. So that's where I was introduced to psilocybin mushrooms, and I went through some period of time where I had some close deaths that I was processing, and so I really I had gone through some traditional therapy and some group meditation type settings to process some of those death experiences, but really going through a mushroom journey, solo trip out in the playa by myself, where I did have access to psilocybin mushrooms, really helped me break down, my mental narrative that was going on, and how to break down, and shed out old narratives that no longer was serving me anymore.
And
So
when was
I was
that?
able to.
When did you do that
This
mushroom
was
trip?
this was 2011
So
2011
so
time frame.
pre-Bitcoin,
Hmm. Yeah,
right?
pre Bitcoin. I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013. I took on a project right after that where I was actually I had a studio in Seattle where we would be running it was basically a fundraising campaign for artists and musicians and to do like Burning Man projects. So we were running stuff like that. And 2013 was when like Snowden and Julian Assange and that sort of narrative, the NSA narrative of the was the 2013 time frame. So I think I heard about Bitcoin in that same time frame. And also the Silk Road. I think Silk Road went down in about that same time
Uh,
frame too. So that was really the first use of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin back then. It was only Bitcoin back then. So a lot of illicit drug trade, right, for various, festivals and so on. I mean, were originally bought in Bitcoin. That's not how I was introduced to Bitcoin, but a lot of people did first come across Bitcoin through buying drugs, off the streets and so on. So I think that was about the 2013 time frame. And then yeah, I 2015 it was just an innocent I was trading it, and uh my Bitcoin master that was teaching me about it, I actually sold all my Bitcoin once, and he got really super mad at me, and I was like, what? That was when I was like, oh, this guy is very, very serious about Bitcoin. And there's something more than just like, I thought it was just like stock trading, kind of, that situation. And I was like, he was like, no, you have to hold on to it. It's for the long term. And I was
when
like,
you did
okay. So,
just to ask you about the psilocybin trip that you had though. So that was in 2011 at
mhm.
Burning Man. And before you took it, did you expect to have some kind of a healing process? Like was that your intent in taking it, or were you just experimenting to see what would happen?
Yeah, I had already had some mushroom journeys by then, and so yeah, by the time I was doing solo journeys out in the fly, and it was over a period of a couple years. So it was about 3 years where I really worked through psilocybin journeys and every time I would I would access that part of me that I usually block because it's painful to access, but there are medicines in combinations, like for example, right now, like MDMA is really being studied as well. And I think that might get descheduled before psilocybin because it really works for PTSD situations,
Yeah,
because it really helps you to confront your trauma in a loving kindness way. And
yeah,
so yeah, so there, I mean, that's the type of medicines that were available. And I didn't know. I mean, I learned as I went along each journey. I learned, what works for me, what doesn't. And just over the years I've just been using psilocybin. And then I got locked in with caregiving for my mother. I've been caregiving for my mom since 2017. So I couldn't go out to Burning Man. It's like, and it's also Burning Man inflation is a real deal. Like I tried to see if about ticketing, and it's like a couple $1,000s now. And I was just like, oh, I
Right.
have Burning Man inflation too. So now there's this whole tiered access issue, economically. And
Mm,
yeah, as an activist with that's when I kind of turned to being more of an activist role in psilocybin, because I didn't have access to psilocybin
right.
unless I go all the
Can,
way out to the playa in the desert and have access to medicines out there.
could you talk just a little bit about what decriminalized nature actually is intended to do? So it's a decentralized organization, but the idea is to allow people to have access to psychedelic drugs for treatment purposes. But you have quite strong views about it being accessible in a festival and a religious setting as well. And I know that some people, for example, like I think, have you read the book How to Change Your Mind? The Michael
Yes.
Pollan one. Yeah, I mean, he sort of made some comments, I think, either in the book or in the Netflix series about how ancient times or in other cultures, these substances are used as a in a religious ritual, like a shamanic ritual. So they're not controlled exactly as in they're banned, but they're only used in certain contexts. Could you talk a little bit about the difference as well between doing those in a religious context versus a festival context versus like a clinical setting?
Sure, yeah. The debate right now within the psychedelic world is this legal model versus a decriminalized model. And exactly, the decriminalized model is decentralized organization, and we just want possession to be not a criminal activity. So there won't be
Right.
any prosecution or jail time for possession, and we just want it to be accessible to us. Whereas a legal model is it would be a controlled substance and only accessible through a clinical setting, so
Hmm.
through a psychiatrist or a therapist who is licensed to provide mushrooms to the patient, and it's a clinical model, and they're talking about insurance models. And right now, the decriminalized nature started out as at the municipal level. So Oakland was the first chapter that actually decriminalized at the city level. And then, yeah, throughout the last four or 5 years now, various cities, we have now about a dozen to probably about 15 cities now that have passed decriminalization, that they will not allocate police funding to prosecute possession. So, including Seattle, where I'm located. So that is the decriminalization model. And then now it moved in the United States. It moved to the state level, and Oregon passed two measures. 109, which was the state authority that would provide the legal model for the clinical side, and then 110, which was a possession decriminalization at the state level. And 109 is now where sort of we're observing, and Washington State is also has all various states now, like 5 or 6 states now have working groups that are trying to figure out how to license these psilocybin, basically retreats or service centers. So they're trying to figure out what types of settings that they would allow psilocybin to be administered. So the
So
debate and fight is there right now, and Colorado actually has a model that's um, much better than Oregon, that allows for a community grow model, which is something that Psilocybin Citadel, which is the project that I founded, and we have a 5-member board now looking at. We want to try to see if we can have a community model that's accessible for settings such as ceremonial settings or festival settings, because one, the cost model is much more lower in that, instead of a one-on-one therapy. The one-on-one therapies are coming in Oregon from $3,500 to $15,000 per treatment. And, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's just insane for just one mushroom journey, right?
yeah.
So yeah, that, I mean, the accessible, how do we get, mushrooms accessible to the working people, the plebs, right? And we need to be looking at Washington has some allowance for group administration, so I am still keeping an eye on this. But they did not include decriminalization, so I actually broke.
Oh, you've just gone on to mute. Hold on. You need to unmute yourself. Uh, I got up to the bit of, you got up to
And
the bit of decriminalization.
yeah, we did not get decriminalization at the state level, so that's when I started to take a look at this alternative model of actually trying to see if we can build psilocybin advocacy group on Bitcoin, and that's a project called Psilocybin Citadel that we're working on. And yeah, we were able to get a little booth in the Miami conference. Just a couple of people that some couple homies that came through from Bitcoin Twitter, and and I was able to sponsor them through, because we have a payment system that we can work on. So we're actually now really using Bitcoin to see if, I mean, it's a technology. I want to see what, this is very experimental, and I want to see what we can do with it. So
To support
Bitcoin is
that.
already, I mean, yeah, it's already in use. And yeah, I mean, this is about Access Tribe. I just wanted to also mention, there's always this call for how do we get more women into the space, both in psilocybin and in Bitcoin. And for me, my answer to that is always just build the tools that we need. If we want more women in Bitcoin, like we don't have time. Like I had to learn in between taking care of my mom, reading this. I mean, most working women, we don't have time to
They
be
don't
like
have time.
studying like in depth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I
it
think
does.
that I was going to say, I think that tooling is coming
Yeah.
now with the Lightning Network and AI sort of
Hmm.
scaling up the development. So I definitely think that's coming into the space. Um, so okay, so one thing I wanted to ask you just on that as well before we move on to the next thing is
Hmm.
when you talk about a community model, what does that look like
Hmm.
from a legal perspective? So how does that play out? So if you're saying that it's not going to be, or what you're advocating for is that it not just be restricted to a clinical setting, how does a community model differ from just decriminalizing possession?
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I mean, that's the model that I'm trying to find. I have a couple accounts that I follow both on Instagram and Twitter that have reported that there are some community models in Colorado.
And how
So
does
if
that
anybody
work?
actually,
How does the
yeah, I
community model
actually
actually work?
I want to know. So that's one of the things that I'm like one the next project that Psilocybin Citadel is trying to do is we want to actually build a bounty board through Bitcoin, so I can actually start hiring reporters that can go into places like Colorado, and I can basically put a bounty saying, just X Satoshis, can you somebody go and check this community out and report back to me on how they're modeling this community through the legal, through the legal model within Colorado. So I can now say, okay, if I wanted to have a retreat, I have the option of popping up in Colorado, for example, or I
Right.
mean, anywhere in the world. This is like, I mean, Bitcoin is global. So if Canada comes in and decriminalizes psilocybin, tomorrow, I may just buy a cabin up in British Columbia and start a place where plebs can hang out and do a psilocybin retreat, right? So it really is. Bitcoin is just a holding place for me at this time. I'm still, regardless of whether Satoshi is the state or the United States adopts it, Bitcoin is an amazing technology. I mean, it really is, digital cash. And, if with the Lightning Network being built out and Nostr coming in where it's, you can actually have your, direct connection to the wallet through, I did the March off Twitter for March and tried out Nostr for a month. And I was just trying out the pipelines on the Zaps over there, and yeah, it's amazing. You can get paid for a funny meme now,
Yeah.
through I made 30 cents on one meme, through in March. So, I mean, it's a whole different economy that's being built through applications.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's fascinating to watch that.
So marrying together like the piece then about the sort of psilocybin. So aside of the mechanics of actually operating Psilocybin Citadel, in terms of how you see those two things like Bitcoin and psychedelics kind of being linked up, what similarities do you see in those two things in terms of how they operate and what they do to you, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the top level, Bitcoin is code and it's freedom of speech, freedom of to transact with, at a peer-to-peer level without any, third party interference. Just like we watched with the Canadian truckers, right, that was shut down for speaking up. Psilocybin is a scheduled drug in the United States at this time. So, if we have an advocacy group, even if we're not selling, if somebody shuts my bank account down tomorrow, I don't have access to, my stored wealth. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a concern. So the sovereign money aspect, and same with psilocybin and psychedelics. The psilocybin Citadel is advocating for direct access to these medicines without the state coming in and regulating the model that we can be administered. So, we want to actually, regulate through, you know, we don't want to have all the guardrails off. We want to educate for safe and responsible use of psychedelics. And through education, just like Bitcoin, I think, I was talking to, one of our board members. She's a lawyer too. And we said, what is Psilocybin Citadel? And I said, I think it really is an advocacy group and to educate people about both Bitcoin and the, uses of psychedelic medicine to heal, trauma in your past,
Yeah.
and be able to, find, the reason why I'm really like strong about my opinion is psychedelic is very, it deconstructs your programming. And so a lot of your programming is culturally based. And so, we were talking about Terence McKenna. He talks about dominator culture.
Yeah,
And so,
can you just mention for people who don't know who he is?
yeah, Terence McKenna is I mean, he is the original one of the OG psychonauts from the 70s. He wrote 4 books about various uses of mostly psilocybin. He's really he recorded a lot of his teachings, I guess. And now those are accessible to us in the future. He passed away about I can't remember. I think in 99 or I don't remember, but yeah, he was one of the first people that went to the Amazon forest and chronicled the uses of not just psilocybin, but like ayahuasca, which is a stronger indigenous ceremonial setting type of healing medicines that Amazonian tribes still use to this day. And I mean, there's a whole psychedelic tourism built around in Peru based on that. And a
Yeah.
lot of our vets have to go down all the way to South America to heal their trauma through wars and pay thousands of dollars to get there. And why can't we just decriminalize here in the United States, and then just start healing, trauma, not just for veterans, but I mean,
Yeah,
just
for anyone.
COVID
Yeah.
itself. Yeah, I mean, we went through a global crisis and people are traumatized, and we really need to be able to build areas that we can start healing people in.
The video that we had both seen last night on Twitter. So that was basically Terence McKenna talking about. I mean, it was actually quite comical because he said he gave this whole kind of speech about the state of the world, and many of the statements that he made were very reminiscent of what's happening right now with the wars and with all of the kind of chaos going on in the economy. And then I think the person interviewing asked him, like, well, how did you see this? How do you know this? And he said, the mushroom told me, which I just thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
Have you had any similar experiences where you feel like, because I'm interested to talk about your thoughts about Satoshi and the NSA and everything else, and some of the statements that you make on Twitter are not, I wouldn't say that they're provocative, but I think that they are things that people often don't like to think about as a possibility, such as maybe Bitcoin is a state controlled piece of technology, and is it really what we think it is? So I'm just curious, in terms of like your kind of psychedelic experiences, have you had any particularly sort of deep thoughts around these types of topics as it relates to Bitcoin?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin is a very psychedelic journey in and of itself, whether you do drugs or not. Like, it really foundationally changes the way you interact with other people through time and space. And so money itself, I mean, you go through this whole journey of what is money, rabbit hole, and the history of money. And I think with Terence McKenna, I actually heard a clip from him where he talks about cryptocurrency. So before his death, he was already aware of cryptocurrency. And going back to the NSA rabbit hole, there are papers that were published like back in 1998 that were, I mean, the SHA-256 algorithm, which is an encryption code, this military grade encryption that the NSA published. And so I think that Terence McKenna, just as a psychonaut, was just tapped into these various developments in technology. And he often talks about the end of history. And I think that what he means by that is through these recording mechanisms. Like, for example, right now we're recording on a podcast that is going to be digitally imprinted. And so I think that's what he means by the end of history, is that because of this mimetic um, uh, algorithm now, right? I mean, we often talk about on Bitcoin Twitter about the mimetic warfare, right? I mean, I first kind of got tuned into, oh, I should really pay attention to Bitcoin for reals, was when the Jerome Powell printing press started, right? That's the mimetic information that says, oh, pay attention to this, this debt situation that's going on. So I think I'm reading another book that Brandon Clem actually posted, and I was joking that it was like mimetic book club, but it talks about uh I can't remember the title of the book, but it talks about basically mimetics and how information is passed along from human to human. And prohibition, religion is a lot of it is a prohibition of that. So I'm trying to understand the relationship of prohibition of psychedelic drugs at the United Nations level in 1971, which happens to also be when basically the United States lost the Vietnam War and we ran out of money.
And
And
came
so
off
we
the
got
gold
off the gold
standard.
standard. Yeah. And then this fiat credit system was developed through the 80s and just imploded over the years. So and it's interesting. I just listened to the RFK clip on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he talks about, I mean, talk about trauma. RFK Jr. just, I mean, he witnessed his own father and his uncle being assassinated. I mean, the Kennedys are, the American royalty, right? And so now that narrative is coming in with, and him being at Bitcoin conferences. I'm now wondering if, Bitcoin has been an NSA project, experimental project in, outside in, and then now the narrative is going to be written for mass adoption because they already know that the fiat credit system is going to I mean, it's out of control, right?
So your theory on this potentially is that there was an understanding that this kind of money printing that really kicked off in the 19th. So just for context for people listening, in 1971, the US definitively came off the gold standard, so basically defaulted on its debt. And since then, we've just had rampant money printing going on. So inflation has, continued to pace every year. The value of the dollar has continued to plummet. And I think that paper that you referenced, that I read some of it last night, I didn't read all of it, but the one that the NSA paper about cryptocurrency came out in 1997. So is your theory then that that the intent of that was to think about a solution to fiat currency, and is what you're proposing, I'm not going to say what you believe necessarily, but is what you're proposing that this is now coming to fruition, and now the Kennedy who believes in that kind of technology that will solve the fiat crisis is being supported to become the de facto candidate? Is that your thinking?
Yeah, I think that exactly. So I think during the 2008 economic crisis, the housing crisis that happened in the United States, it kicked off a global, I mean, basically all the central banks colluded to make sure, that the whole global financial system wouldn't fail. So I believe that yeah, the intelligence community, I mean, we're tuned into it, and there has been some, talks in the mostly in the gold bug circle about, currency wars, happening in the future. So I'm sure that yeah, and then also this is just a personal, I guess the caveat that this is just a personal theory of mine is yeah, I mean, the tweet that I put out was, what rando would publish a white paper that, coincides with the government, federal government budget cycle. And this is I kind of made the correlation through a psychedelic journey. So this is just a personal theory of mine. But October is actually when the government starts its budget, and the white paper was released on Halloween, which is October 31st. And then the code was published on, Satoshi dropped the code on January 3rd, 2009, which happens to be the same day my mom actually got a VA check after my father died in 2008. And so I had those two, like, in the mushrooms world, synchronicities are meaningful. So I had that keyed away as, an overlap date. And I just passed it away as like, just, oh, it's just orange karma. But then I just started thinking maybe it's a budget cycle thing. And so in 2009, after the economic crisis, perhaps they dropped the Satoshi code just as a default to get that going, because they knew that this money rail, the fiat money rail, would be going off rails in a dozen years or so. And here we are.
Would you posit that the was it 1 million that was held back? Would you posit that would potentially be held by the US government in reserves? So that's their kind of Bitcoin reserves.
Right. And so exactly. And, there's intelligent design in the Bitcoin code. Exactly. The 1 million held back, if it was, just a benevolent, white hat that wanted to save the planet, why was 1 million held back? So there's intelligent design built into Bitcoin that says, okay, I mean, it's still less than 5%. And with the 3 million lost, it's probably, a little bit more, but, yeah, why is that 1 million held back? And then also the halvings are coded to kind of coincide before the US election cycles, right? The next one being around April of 2024. And so the design of the halvings coincide every 4 years with the United States election cycle. So is this sort of a controlled demolition of the fiat, credit, the out of control credit that they knew would happen, and then just to kind of put it back to a hard money standard in this new domain, which is sort of the cyberspace domain. And I think militarily, the old military, that I kind of grew up in, the whole, aircraft carriers, and basically the United States empire. It's too costly to maintain that. I mean, talk about, the United States has 800 bases throughout the world, and having to pay, contractors in the local economy, what would solve that problem? Bitcoin, right? So I think the mass adoption happens when, like, militaries start, utilizing the Bitcoin network to
So
pay its soldiers.
I have a question for you about motives then, because if
Hmm.
we accept the premise, which I think many people now do, that the CIA assassinated JFK, what
Hmm.
motivation would the NSA have to develop and support a technology and then have RFK promote that technology and potentially become the de facto champion of it at a nation state level? Like, why would that be? Why would that be the case?
Yeah, I think the United States realizes that, I mean, we're globally connected conscious now, and media is now, deemed decentralized, right? And so the narrative is shifting, and I think that they realize that the mainstream narrative is breaking down. And, I mean, the global south is, China, is competing down there. I mean, RFK just stated that, like, through the Road and Belt Initiative, they're building in the global south, whereas America's been, you know, you know, pulling wars, right? Not just America, but Europe as well. So I think I think there's a rebranding going on where, hey, this, freedom money, I think it's just the last straw. I mean, RFK Jr. is running on the Truth campaign. It's going to be very interesting to see what kind of truths he's going to be able to disclose to the American public about, the various things that we've been deceived, especially like veterans through wars. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the narrative is definitely shifting. The origin story is quite fascinating. That's just a personal thing that, like, I'm just connecting the dots through. And yeah, I mean, inflation is getting out of control. And, is this the period where we try to go into cyberspace? And, I think there's a new domain. I think it's just a new domain that's being created. I kind of have this in my mind: the outer space, inner space, and cyberspace, right? So, now Elon Musk is, the owner of Twitter. He has all the satellites up around us. Is there some kind of a new higher entity that's being created for, international commerce between, peer to peer? So I think it's a whole brand new domain that's being created. And the change is very scary for a lot of people. And psychedelics, is also about going through that death experience. So, yeah, I think that's why you're going to start seeing a lot more of discussions around both Bitcoin and psychedelics in mainstream.
Question then,
And I
like
think it's just our.
what would the motivation be though for a government to discourage usage of Bitcoin and make it difficult? So like we're seeing at a regulatory level now that the US government has become fairly hostile to certainly to cryptocurrencies, maybe not so much Bitcoin, but they're driving a lot of
Oh,
that
right.
stuff offshore. So I mean, what would be the motivation to do that while at the same time having released that? So I mean, we're full of premises here, but
Hmm.
if Bitcoin was an NSA project and Satoshi was actually a team of NSA people that released that out into the world, um, if RFK is in on this, shall we say, why would they help him, given that the CIA, if we accept that premise, had taken out his uncle? And then why would the US be so actively kind of agitating against Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies at least, if their intent was to use it as a reserve currency and replace the dollar globally? But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you have the answers to these. I'm just posing like
Yeah.
if we take those premises, do the motives actually make sense? Like, why would these actors be doing these things, and how would it actually play out?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. But it's interesting to think about. I love those kind of questions. Um, yeah, I mean, I really think, I mean, to me, like politicians are just being told, like the politicians are the front TV screen that we see, right? So it's obvious the narrative at the, the candidate level, they're being, quote unquote, groomed to talk about Bitcoin. And so, I just think, I mean, I've been involved, like I worked for Boeing for a dozen years on the commercial side. But you can see technology when it rolls out, it rolls out in stages. And this, I mean, Bitcoin is going through these various stages. I think that it was introduced to the cyberspace sort of hacking community first, and then it rolled out into this sort of exchange spaces, and then it was all experimental. And then over the years the business communities, like the MIT, like the MI I have this MIT connection theory too about why the space boy Jason Lowry was showing up with software for a full year. I mean, the United States military would not allow that to happen if it wasn't a campaign, right? So at the same time, he got a huge audience through Michael Saylor, which is he's also an MIT, from origin. So I mean, these institute of technologies, when they roll out technologies, they roll it out in stages, and I think that selective business community leaders were told, and then now the politician layer is being groomed and the narrative is being told, and why, I mean, it's not just RFK. I mean, I think, there's four candidates that are promoting Bitcoin, right? So it's just I think that level, the younger generation, I mean, this is sort of our generation, Gen X coming into control, Sailor, and all these people, Elon, we're all Gen X. We're a chaotic generation. But I think this is sort of the transfer of power from boomers to millennials that's happening from the old industrialized sort of structure to a more decentralized cyberspace network type of structures, including sort of the space domain. So I think militarily, they know they're out of budget and they're out of control too. So I think that Bitcoin is the new, I mean, all it is a decentralized ledger, right? It's just an accounting system with with code. So I think it's being co-developed in the cyberspace, and I mean, I think the United States geopolitically needs to keep the outer space um you know as in dominant control. I mean, that's communication globally. So
So is your theory about
that's
MIT that from an academia perspective, there's some grooming that's happening with people who are either driving it or are being groomed through the MIT educational structure to promote Bitcoin?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, I really do think. I mean, I mean, there'll be a couple of years where, these various apps will be developed in these like techno, and not just MIT. I think it'll just start in like, Georgia Tech and various other, technical schools, that have, good computer science programs. I think they'll switch over to from the old, the first and second, third generation internet to, um, you know, starting to teach kids how to code in Lightning and so on. So and it's already happening already within like, the conference, like hackathons and stuff. It really is reminiscent. I come from the 90s, so it really is the reminiscent of that whole dot-com boom where, the original guys that thought they were the rebels, they became the state, right? They became the Google engineers and the Facebook engineers, and they're just all, being washed out, and now, coming outside. And there's just a new generation. I call this, we were the Revenge of the Nerds generation, but this is Revenge of the Gamers generation. And these kids, oh my, like I'm working with them, and these homies, they move quick, they're fast, they can pop up a website just like that, and stuff I can never do. And so Yeah, I think this Bitcoin development, the dev space and the Lightning layer is going to move pretty fast, and I'm already seeing that. So yeah, it's exciting times. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, essentially, we're going to have the internet now with native money, native currency being built in. So yeah, like some of the apps that I'm using with some of the teams, like Lightning is already built in where we can have like people on stage, like the Nostr Spaces has Lightning built in, so people can tip, people on, on the platform, like a couple stats,
Yeah.
you can have jokes and get paid, whatever, like $1 per joke or whatever it is. I mean, it's going to be a whole brand new space that opens up.
So if you have these sort of suspicions about this kind of state-driven agenda with Bitcoin,
Mhm.
like your demeanor about that, though, seems like not particularly concerned. Like it doesn't seem as if this kind of in any way tarnishes for you your view of Bitcoin. Is that an accurate statement? And if so, why?
Yeah, I would still, yeah, I mean, I'm meditating on it right now. I mean, I have to really understand the implication of it. So yeah, and I think that these are the healthy type of debates to have. It was interesting the reaction in the meme. It kind of came into three camps, and there was the, oh man, the state is too dumb to be like, Satoshi camp. And then there's the, yeah, I mean, the kind of the veteran camp that's like, oh, yeah, we recognize this, we kind of recognize this. And
What
there's
is in
like another
recognize
camp
them?
that's
Do you mean like the
like
veteran camp was
recognize,
like we recognize the modus
yeah,
operandi kind of thing?
well, we recognize that it's, I mean, I think that it's kind of like military grade encryption and so on, right? So, and then there's the middle camp, which is where I sit, is I want a healthy debate about it. Like, I'm a maxi. I really do believe in Bitcoin. What are the implications as an activist, right, against a scheduled drug that the federal state controls? And what if, I mean, I still think it's safe. It's still independent code and we can still, pay people, peer to peer. So that's why I want to have a healthy debate about whether this, what the implication of it is not. And what, I mean, origin aside, what, how this is, I mean, I'm not really worried about it because I really do see that Bitcoin is a transformational technology and it's going to happen regardless. And so I've seen the technology enough that I'm like, okay, this is going to take off whether it's the state or not. So I need to position myself with it and then just understand how, as things develop, how it's going to be controlled. Because I mean, I'm fighting the psychedelic side about state control and regulations, but I also saw Senator Loomis from Wyoming tweet about, we want to have regulations around Bitcoin on who can operate. Like, we want to protect and make sure that individuals can own and operate with Bitcoin. And then once the regs come in, then it becomes a question of who can operate a Bitcoin based business in that territory, right? So yeah, I mean, I think these are the kind of things that as a community within Bitcoin that we hold and store our wealth in, we want to be able to talk about because I'm hoping that we'll have less strict regulations around psilocybin as, healing medicines. And I want to be able to operate in a hard money standard, right, on Bitcoin. So, you know, figuring out and how to navigate sort of the state regs on two fronts. It was just keeping an eye on it. And then, I've come to this place where I can't do it by myself. So that's why I'm working on this advocacy group and getting, people like lawyers on board that can, maybe we can start figuring out how to do a legal defense fund, for example. As a membership kind of a thing. So we're
Mm.
really just trying to keep an eye on how things develop on both fronts and then navigating through it and then advocating for both
What
psychedelics and Bitcoin.
what advice would you have for somebody then that is interested in the Bitcoin space and maybe wants to go down this rabbit hole? So I mean, I'll definitely share that NSA document on the show notes, but is there anything else that like you think is worthwhile in terms of trying to look into that? And should people be worried? Should they be wanting to discuss this?
No, I don't think it's a sense of worry. But I accept that, maybe your narrative is going to change over time, and just, I mean, the whole point of, I mean, we need to have critical thinking, right? I mean, the whole Bitcoin space, as well as psychedelics, is about observing and having critical thought about this new technology and its impact on us as a human species, and if it is, one entity that's going to control that 5% is, I mean, is that going to have an impact on that? Or, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't have any secret information either. This is just my own, like, meditative thought of probably thinking too much, right? So
Well,
yeah, I'm
I feel
curious to
like you
see.
I feel like you have the psychonaut key though, because I think this is one of the things I was reading on Tim McKenna's thing
Yeah.
that like it's supposed to be like this key that gives you access to the this other information. So yeah, maybe that's the secret information that you have is that you tap into these things on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, I really did. I mean, the psychedelics, I mean, we talk about, you know, different psychology of like symbolism and there's more than just language, right? There's different ways humans communicate and mimetics and it's a vibration too. I think that we just pick up on certain key elements and synchronicities that just like the January 3rd, 2009 date is the sticky point for me, and that's just a personal thing because and so I mean that's kind of where you use it as a starting point and then start meditating on what the implications are. So yeah, I don't have any secret information from the alternate universe or anything like that, but I mean we're all on a journey and we're on a co-journey together, right? I mean Bitcoin really is, I mean, the ultimate rabbit hole. Like, there's no end to it, and I love talking about it. Like, it's such a fascinating thing, and how humans exchange energy, right? And over time and space, and yeah, it does get very psychedelic very fast. I wish Terrence McKenna was around to like talk about Bitcoin. That would be like the one person I would like to bring back to talk about Bitcoin would be Terrence McKenna.
Yeah, definitely. So, question is Bitcoin how we get off the planet?
I think so. I mean, how else would you send money to space? Like, right? I mean, there's all these other cryptocurrency. Oh, and like to touch back on your why is there like the SEC is just like for just put out like the cryptocurrency, like they're taking out the cryptocurrencies and the Coinbase and Finance,
Mm.
right? I think for me that's just plugging up holes. Like they still can't stop Bitcoin. They can't stop Bitcoin no matter what. Even if the Satoshi is the state, they still cannot stop Bitcoin. That's why I'm still very much a maxi because they can't stop it now. So I think that's probably the best argument that, Bitcoin Twitter is putting against me is that why would the state shoot itself? Well, they have to have a turnover too. Every state has to die and then the new generation and new technology has to be kept up to date. And I think that, just like money has those different layers, the military industrial complex has various layers too that are outdated. And one of them is the aerospace industry where I come from, right? And yeah, and so I think that there's a lot of fat that needs to be shed in that space. Trillions of dollars that are, unaccounted for, and programs like the F-35 that are just, a bust that they're spending millions and millions of, trillions of dollars on when we really should be focusing on defense, in the space and the big, I mean, defending cyberspace, right?
So,
And
do you
and so I
think
think
that
that the
I was going to say, do you think that somebody like Hal Finney was a security agency asset then, or actor? And he's apparently cryogenically frozen. Do,
Yeah,
do we
I don't
believe that
know.
he did
I mean,
die?
it's such a like. I mean, it really is like a science fiction novel, right? Like so. I mean, yeah. I mean, if he is Satoshi, I mean, is there a way to like? I mean, go back and access his brain? I mean, one of the space that Elon Musk is working on is sort of the brain the brain computer interface, right? So was it Neuralink? His company is Neuralink. Yeah, Neuralink.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that, I mean, and then going back to psychedelics and a lot of I mean, I don't want to knock the clinical model because they do actually fund a lot of scientific studies that have done a lot of like brain, brain map imaging and how psychedelics really what they do is turn on the entire brain so that you access various regions of the brain that normally is not accessed, and it's through this uh it's called a DMN. I can't remember what it stands for, but essentially that's where the ego sits. And so yeah, I mean, computer systems and satellite systems are more of a network type of linkage, and I think that um, yeah, we're just moving into a digital domain space that interlinked with satellites through information technology. And yeah, we'll need to have Bitcoin on that layer if we want to, have an economy on that cyber, inner outer space domain, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. A lot of food for thought there.
Yeah, there is. But I don't know anything. I have no idea. I mean, um, nobody does. That's why it's fun. Nobody can discount it. Nobody can discount it, right?
No, I
At
think
this
you're yeah, I just think that your perspective on this is quite interesting because having a background, of having grown up in the military and then having worked for Boeing and then also being a psychonaut, it's just quite interesting when you combine all of that with Bitcoin that you're one of the few people that I see kind of asking these provocative questions. And they are provocative, but
yeah,
I think they're super interesting and they might all be crazy, talk, I don't know, but I think it's really
yeah,
fascinating just to delve into these things and actually theorize about if this was the case, then what would that actually mean
yeah,
for Bitcoin or for the economy or for the world or for our lives or anything else. So yeah.
yeah,
Do you follow
yeah.
Eric Weinstein stuff on Twitter at all?
I do a little bit. I mean, not directly, but yeah. What is it concerning his? I know
I'm
I'm aware of his like philosophies and like school of thought, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he's just got some really interesting theories about stuff. Like his whole thing is that he doesn't want to have a shared fate with the Bidens and the Putins of the world. And, he's like, we need to find a way to get off this planet to survive as a human race. And then I also discovered it was only like 3 or 4 months ago, I discovered he was a Bitcoiner. So he was actually at the Bitcoin Miami conference. And I don't know if you watched his talk back, but it's incredible. But he also talks a lot about these government agencies and the secrets that they have and, what they may or may not be doing. So he's an interesting kind of combo, somebody who's very feet on the ground, quite rational, quite thoughtful about things, but he's also able to think about things at a much deeper level. So he doesn't look at the structure of society or commerce or the world on a surface level. He really sort of delves down and says, well, actually, what if this is what's really going on? So I just find his kind of stuff really interesting to dip into because it really provokes me to think a bit more. And he makes theories that sound like tinfoil hat theories, actually sound quite plausible in some ways. So it's just quite interesting to listen to him theorize about stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually not as negative as some of these guys that are like, we need to get off the planet. Like, I just think there's so much of the planet that's still remaining. Like, we're just all caught up in our heads. I mean, just step outside into the rural areas. There's plenty of room to develop on this planet, and there's beautiful areas, So, yeah, I just think that that's just a little bit of a front that we need to, like a fear tactic to push technology, because I do
Mm,
think some of these technologies that are pushed for space exploration ends up benefiting us. Like for example, like I want to really move out to a rural region, and if I have satellite internet, link up,
Yeah.
that I can do commerce through Bitcoin, that opens up a lot of rural areas for commerce that maybe that traditional banking system has failed, right? So I think that we need to take a look at, you know, um, some of that, technology that gets developed through some of these push to explore. Let's try to figure out how to feed that back to actually help us in society. Like number one thing that I really need right now is nursing. I mean, right now the COVID has really like I mean there's a nursing shortage, there's
Mm.
inflation going on. So one of the things that I actually counter against some of the Bitcoin space, like Jeff Booth's theory about the price of tomorrow, is
Mm-hmm.
he has a theory that automation will benefit society, but my counter argument is you cannot automate human services. You can't
Yeah.
automate nurse, can't automate the psychedelic, sitters that, go through and grieve with you. You can't automate these human services. And so, can Bitcoin actually help us on a hard money standard to provide some of these services that fiat economy is not providing for us? So, I think that's really where I mean, and I'm gonna be honest, like, that's where I think women end up doing a lot of this type of work. And, because of the cultural wars that are going on, we can't talk about some of these real issues that are frankly oppressing us. I've been taking care of my mom by myself for 7 years without any help. So how, and everybody, I mean, around the world is going to be in the same situation. So
Yeah.
how do we start having some of these discussion, around, psychedelics and Bitcoin and money, right? So that our money is not, degraded away over years. So I think it's very important that we start, talking about this in the public.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end on. And I hope to pick up this
Okay,
conversation again. And I'll certainly banter with you on Twitter about this because I think this has just
perfect.
been very fascinating. And I'm looking forward to hearing some of your other thoughts as they spring into your mind and you post them. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Laura, for doing the podcast and for all the work that you're doing to decriminalize nature and for just having such an open and inquisitive mind, frankly.
Yes. Thank you so much, Krista. Yeah, I mean, really, I do say this at the end of every podcast. Podcasts are a really important way for us activists to get our word out to our community. So thank you, Krista, for the opportunity. Yeah, access is a huge problem, I think, both in psychedelics and Bitcoin. So thank you for the opportunity for me to talk about it on your show, on your
Thank
podcast.
you.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Thanks so much, Krista.